question. But yeah, it's mine.
I really like the word fair, don't you?
I think it's important to be fair.
Fair.
Fair beats unfair, right?
Fair.
Okay. Okay, so again, while we're getting a note, why did I just do this demonstration? What was the purpose of that? What do we think? Okay, that's good thinking. Well, let me ask you this. Where else would we see that reaction? Yeah, where in nature? That was a very good, can I say something? That answer in nature was very much a case of I don't know if anyone here goes to Sunday school, but when you're in, yeah, that's mine. Thank you. Thank you. It will be yours, but right now it's mine. You did good on it, by the way. That was a good job, but we're gonna wait and see later. So when I was in Sunday school and you weren't really paying attention and somebody asked a question, you were usually safe to just say Jesus as the answer, and that was usually a safe bet. It wasn't always the right answer, but it was a good guess. So in nature is kind of like that in science. It's a good safe answer. But when else do we see that same reaction, that same thing I just did, where I took all that sugar and I burned it quickly? Where does that happen all the time? We'll get to that, but that's not the answer I'm looking for. Yeah.
Okay.
That's okay. Well, what did I put in there? I poured some sugar. In fact, I bet you I poured about 15 grams of sugar, which, by the way, that's about the amount of sugar in about a can of Coke. So if you drink a can of Coca-Cola, it's about that much sugar. Do you see the energy there? What did you see? It gave off a lot of, it gave off bright flaring light. That light was nice and purple because we had the potassium in there. Potassium gives it that purple color. If you burn just sugar without the potassium, you'd get just a red flame like any other. But the potassium makes it kind of more fun. But if I put my hand in there, good idea? Yeah. Wow. Hopefully you don't mean that because it's me. Yeah. Yeah, why? Why would it be a bad idea to put my hand in there? A lot of heat, tons of heat, right? That's what we think of when we see fire. Now, where does that same reaction happen all the time? Well, it's happening right now, inside you. Yeah, that reaction is exactly how your body gets energy, right? Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. So listen. Shh. When we get to when you get to grade 10 biology, you'll learn all about your cells, and you'll learn about a little thing in your cell called the mitochondria. And if your experience, with that is anything like mine was in school, it'll be really boring. But there's nothing boring about the mitochondria because that's all the mitochondria is doing all the time. It's taking sugars that your body has gotten. Where does your body get sugars? Yeah, food, the things we eat. And it's taking those, and it puts them in the mitochondria, and it burns them, and it takes the energy. And it uses that energy to do stuff. So think of it this way. And by the way, your brain does that to get energy to think. And, your saliva glands do that to get energy to secrete saliva and all the things. But, what's one of the biggest things we use energy for? Yeah. Movement, yeah. And you know this. You know this intuitively because just like that fire, what did that fire release a lot of its energy as? Why is it a bad idea for me to put my hand in there? Because it's heat. Hey, if you go out and run 10 kilometers, if I went out and ran 10 kilometers, they'd have to drag me away like in a body bag. But if you're young and healthy, if you went out and ran 10 kilometers, how are you going to feel after? Hot, yeah. And you don't just feel hot, you are hot. Your body gets hot because what's happening inside all those mitochondria, inside all those cells? That reaction. Does that make sense? The heat isn't the intended product, by the way. Your body doesn't want to make heat. In fact, your body really doesn't want to make heat. In fact, it tries to get rid of that heat. So when you're running and getting hot, what happens next? The sweat starts. Oh, Lord, does the sweat start, right? Because the heat is just an accidental byproduct. But why is the mitochondria getting hot? Because it's burning sugar. So when you hear people talk about like burning calories and things like that, that's not a figure of speech. It's not a figure of speech. It's what's happening. It's what's happening. All right, and the crazy thing is, you know, if they were able, you know, your car can't run on Coca-Cola for a lot of reasons, main of which being like those valves and all that sticky sugar are not a good combination. It would seize up. But there's enough energy in a can of Coca-Cola to drive your car down the road. We just saw it, right? We just burned it. There's tons of energy in there. It's energy dense, it's sugar. So what we're going to talk about today is energy. Now, where, I ask you, does all of the energy that we get come from if we go back far enough? In other words, I eat a hamburger for lunch, say, but that hamburger is made of, yeah, cow. That cow ate grass. Where'd the grass get its energy? The sun. Good. All of our energy, if we trace it back far enough, comes from the sun. By the way, it's all solar power. If I go put, I have an electric car, but if I go put gas in my wife's car, and if I go put gas in my wife's car and I drive it down the road, that gasoline gives it energy, right? What did that gasoline used to be? Yeah, and before it was oil, it was what? Ladies. It's down in the ground, yeah. What did it used to be? Now it can be in the sand, like in Alberta, the tar sands, definitely. Rock sand is where we get it. What did it used to be? Yeah, it used to be, what's a fossil? A fossil is the leftover of living things, yeah. So oil used to be living things. Oil is what happens when you take dead plant material, dead animal material, and you leave it underground for millions of years under high heat and pressure, you get oil. So the gasoline I put in my car used to be oil. That oil, millions and millions of years ago, was living things, walking around on the planet, swaying around in the breeze, that died and were covered in rocks and sand and compressed into oil. And hey, those living, breathing things ate other living, breathing things, or they were plants, and they all get their energy from the sun. So even when you put gas in your car, where did the power really come from? The sun, if you chase it back far enough. Does that make sense? And even the center of our planet is another source of energy, geothermal energy. It's really hot. But hey, why is our planet hot? Well, because it's just stardust. Our planet is just made of the accreted matter of gases from other stars that blew apart in supernovae and from the Big Bang that created the universe in the first place, so it's come together. Even that heat at the center of our planet just comes from the same stuff that makes up our sun. That's also power. It's just how it gets transferred along. Does that kind of make sense? That's heavy stuff, and that's complicated, confusing stuff. So let's think of it this way. The easiest way we get energy from the sun is what? I mean, yeah, I can put solar panels up, but that's complicated stuff. Somebody has to build them, I have to buy them. But if we just look out the window, we see all kinds of things getting energy from the sun. What is it? Trees, grass. What are all these things? Plants. Good. And plants are the key to this whole thing. Plants are why anything can live on this planet, because plants have a very special ability to have the sun shine down on them and capture that energy and keep it. When the sun shines down on us, we just get hot. Right? We just get warm, and we get a sunburn if you stay out too long. I never get sunburns, but other people get sunburns. So now, they do this using a process called photosynthesis. And this is, has anyone heard this word before? Did you talk about this in elementary school? Photosynthesis, what does photo mean? Yeah, photo, I mean, we call it a picture, but that's because a picture uses what? Photo is the Latin word for, oh, it's a high five. What are we high-fiving? What's photo mean in Latin? Yeah, light. If you see a word photo, it means light. Photograph, graph is just a picture. Photo means light. Photograph's just a picture you made with light. That's all it is. So photo means light. What does synthesis mean? If I synthesize something, what have I done? You had it with the first two words. When I synthesize something, I make something. Synthesizing just means making. So what is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is, it's using light to make something. Listen, science words always sound fancy because you don't speak Latin. If you spoke Latin, science would be like, all these words are so deadly obvious. Like, plants use a process called photosynthesis. But if you spoke Latin, I'd be saying, so plants do this using a process called making stuff with light. That's all it means. But I sound a lot smarter if I say photosynthesis, don't I? That's all it means. Don't be intimidated by words. It just means using light to make stuff. You can add in the using light to make something. That's all photosynthesis is. So let's talk about what we use light to do. So the idea is this. We have light energy, and the plant is going to combine this with that light energy with what? What do plants need? Plants do need water. They definitely need water, but that's not. So that's one thing. We're going to need some water. What else do plants need? Yeah. Yeah, nutrients, but that's for a different purpose. I want to focus specifically on this process. Yeah. Very good. Plants need carbon dioxide. I want to quickly remind myself what term they use for something here. Very good. So plants need water, and they need, is everyone comfortable if I put CO2? Everyone's comfortable with that being carbon dioxide? That doesn't stress anyone out? And then what do they do with this? What do they do? So we put light energy, we shine it on the plant's leaf. The plant gets water. Where does it get its water? Yeah, it's at the ground, through its roots. It comes on up. It gets CO2. Where does it get that? Yeah, definitely. That's a better answer than I was looking for. Yeah, we breathe it out, but just the air. But yeah, totally, from us. And what does it make? Yeah, so here's what it doesn't want. The plant actually doesn't want any of this oxygen. When it takes the CO2, it wants the carbon. It's going to make things out of that carbon. But the oxygen, it doesn't care about. So it actually just gives the oxygen right back. It sends it out. Doesn't need the oxygen. That's good for us, isn't it? Because we do need the oxygen. The plant doesn't. It lets it go. And it uses that carbon to make, should have started this all more to the left. Luckily, I can move it. You guys can't, and I'm sorry about that. So it lets the oxygen go. And what does a plant make from light? It takes all that carbon and it puts it together to make, does anyone know? Yeah, and specifically, this process makes sugar. It actually makes sugar. You don't need to draw this, but it actually makes a very specific sugar. Let's see if I can remember this. It's been a while. But where's the fun in that? Have a sense of adventure. You don't. I just said you don't have to write this. So, yeah. Yeah, so it makes that. Yeah, so again, listen to me. You don't need to worry about that yet. But it's interesting, it makes a sugar molecule. So they take light energy, They add it to water. They add it to carbon dioxide. They don't need all the oxygen. A lot of the oxygen is left over, so they get rid of that. And they make sugar. Now, what does a plant do with sugar? What does a plant do with sugar? Okay, good. So specifically, it doesn't need it as food because it's getting its energy from the sun, but it's energy storage for sure. So sugar is a very good way to store energy. So plants do that. By the way, you know this. Like if you think about it, what is fruit? Fruit is the seed of that plant, and it surrounds that seed with a bunch of sugar, right? That's why fruit's so sweet, because it takes the seed that the plant's going to need to grow, and it surrounds it with sugar, energy storage. So they use it to store energy. What else? You can add nitrogen and make proteins. All right, so a plant can make proteins. All protein is that sugar with some nitrogens added to it. Whoa. Does anyone know this word? Cellulose. Have you heard of that before? Cellulose is the hard, rigid part of plants. All right? So when a plant has, think of like a celery stalk, you know, that's crunchy and crisp. That crunchy crispiness that plants have, same thing you feel on like the stem of a flower or a blade of grass. Whenever a plant is making a hard surface like that, this is rigid plant material. All it is they just take a bunch of these sugars and they stick them together to make big long chains that are tough and strong. So rigid plant material. So believe it or not, even though we can't eat it, we don't have the chemicals to break it down. Like a blade of grass is actually just made of millions and millions and millions of sugar molecules all stuck together. If we could break that down, it'd be like the sweetest thing in the world, but we can't. We can't eat grass and get any energy from it. Hey, can you think of an animal that can? Dogs will eat grass sometimes, but like us, they can't survive on it. Cats will eat grass, but again, like us, they won't actually survive on it. Rabbits can eat lettuces and things like that and get some energy. Yeah, rabbits can get a bit, though they do need more energy-rich material too. Cow. And a cow has a really complex structure to do this. It has to have like 4 different stomachs and move the grass between them. Yeah, it's a lovely process. But these are what sugars are used for. They can use them to store energy. They can add nitrogen and make protein, and proteins are the active bits that do things in our body. Same thing in a plant. And they can make cellulose. They can make like rigid material from it. So they take these sugars that they make using the sun's energy and the carbon dioxide in the air around us, and they use it to make stuff. Does that make sense? All of the material in a plant comes from the air, the CO2, and the water in the ground. There's a famous experiment done to prove this, where if you ask a little kid, what does a tree use to get bigger? What do you think a little kid would say? Who hasn't been to science class? They would imagine that the tree grows, and where does it get all the material to make itself a bigger tree? Yeah, they tend to think, either they'll think, well, it just happens, they just get bigger, or they'll think that it comes from the ground, the soil, right? But a very early science experiment showed that as a tree grows, if you keep weighing the soil it's in over and over again, the soil stays there. It doesn't use up any of the soil. A plant's mass comes from water, carbon dioxide, and it puts it together using the energy from the sun. Does that make sense? All right. So with that in mind, we call plants producers. I'm not going to say anything more about that, but you probably came across that term doing that homework bit, yeah? The term producers? Great. And then you talked about food chains. So I found a nice picture I liked online, and I put it on here. 3 different examples of food chains. Farmer and you farm corn. You love that you've got some owls hanging out in your barn because owls eat rats, and rats eat corn. So you did this with the simulator yesterday. Imagine this food chain. If I took all the owls away, what would happen in this food chain? The rats would eat all the corn, and then what would happen? You'd have no corn, and if there's no corn, what's going to happen to the rats? The rats are going to die, and what will you end up with? Yeah, a field full of nothing. And by the way, animals will do this. When we disrupt ecosystems, animals will eat themselves into extinction. They will eat the whole food supply away. So we need an ecosystem that's balanced. So if you're a farmer, you want to balance out the rat population by making sure you do nothing to scare off your owl population.
You can just buy like a bunch of cats and just let them be wild.
Which is true. That's another food chain altogether, right? The rats are awfully big for cats. Yeah. I know cats will definitely go after the mice. Will a cat eat a rat? Will it? I've seen some pretty scary looking rats. I don't know. I'm curious.
There's actually a story that
So one sec. Guys, can I have your attention? We're developing this nasty habit where every 5 seconds or so I have to ask you to be quiet because you're all talking. And that's not conducive to learning and sharing. All right. So my hope and my goal is that this be a fun experience and a class that we all like taking and we learn lots of stuff. But it doesn't work. It really doesn't work if I'm having to pause every 5 seconds to say, hey, excuse me. And I can't imagine that that's any different in any other class. That's not productive learning environment if we can't go 2 minutes without having to ask everyone to be quiet, right? So let's be respectful when people are talking. Yeah.
There's actually a story that talks about this and how if you either take away part of the food chain or you add more to it, it could actually throw off the natural balance of the food chain.
Yeah, and we're going to spend whole days talking about that, talking about real-world situations where food chains are disrupted. Absolutely, yeah.
That's my rats.
Can I? Did we look this up?
Yeah.
Fantastic. I learned something today. Thank you very much. So now, here's what I want to talk about today, which is, does anyone remember, we call the plant, we said in the last plane that we call the plants producers, right? We say that, in this case, the corn is a producer, which means that it takes the sun's energy and turns it into sugars. So the corn is a producer. What do we call the rat in this case? The rat that is eating the corn? Very good. This would be our primary consumer. I'm just going to put primary cons because I'm lazy. And what would the owl be? Secondary consumer. Good. Everyone remember seeing that language? I have to ask, by the way, because I never know what people have done in elementary school. Was that new to you, or is that something you've talked about before? You've talked about before, so this isn't new information. Okay, that's good to know, so I can go a little quicker. Here's what I do want to talk about. Just like with burning the sugar over there, when I burned the sugar, what did it release most of its energy as? Heat. When I run 10 kilometers, I want my muscles to do nothing but move. It would be great if I could run 10 kilometers and stay perfectly cool because all my muscles are doing is moving. But the reality is they don't just do that. What do they produce a lot of? Heat, right? There's a huge percentage waste. Not only that, but if a rat eats a thing of corn, does it eat the whole plant? Roots, stalk, leaves, what's it eat? Just the corn. Does it eat the cob? No, just the corn. So when we say the rat eats the corn, it's not eating the whole plant, is it? So here's what's interesting. Let's say, what number did I choose? I think I chose 20,000, yeah. So on average, and this is just an average, but on average, we get about 10% of the energy every time we eat something. So when you eat something, you get about 10% of the energy that's available. So let's say, for example, if something was 300 calories all inside of it, when it gets eaten, how much energy will we capture if we capture 10%? What's 10% of 300? Does anyone know how to do that? Yeah, very good. That is 10%. 10% of 300 is 30. Right? Percent just means out of every 100, take 10. So 300 out of every 100, take 10, 10, 20, 30. And then if something eats that, how much will we get? Only 3 calories available. It's a very inefficient process. Does that make sense? So let's go look at these food chains. And let's take a look at this top one. If I have 20,000 calories worth of corn, I've got a big corn crop, 20,000 calories a day worth. That's how much it'll sustain there. When the rat eats it, what percent of that energy can we keep? What percent do we keep every time? 10%. So if the rat can only get 10% of that, how many calories does the rat get? 2,000. Good. Now, if the owl is eating the rat, how many calories is he going to get? 200. So if there's 20,000 calories of light energy available for corn, that only leaves 2,000 calories if the rats eat all the corn. And that only leaves 200 calories if the owls eat all the rats. Does that make sense? So what are there going to be the least of in my ecosystem? What do I have to have the least of? Owls. Does that make sense? Did everyone see that in the simulator yesterday? There's a lot of grass. A lot of grass. There's a lot less. Yesterday it was what, the hawk up at the top? A lot fewer hawks. Because every step is really inefficient. Does that make sense? I'm not going to do all of these because that gets a little boring. So let's jump right to the bottom. And again, if we had 20,000 calories worth of grass, how many calories worth of grasshopper does that give me? 2,000. How many calories worth of frog will that give me? Very good. How many calories worth of pythons will that leave me if the pythons are eating the frogs? 20. Very good. And how many calories for the eagle is that? 2. Wow. Can an eagle live on 2 calories a day? No. So think about this. Let's say that that eagle actually needs, you don't have to do this, all right? What you just wrote is good. But let's say that an eagle, a person, how many calories does an adult male need? Does anyone know? 2,000. So let's imagine that an eagle needs the same. Obviously that's silly, but let's say maybe 3 or 4 eagles need the same. Does that make sense? So let's say we need 2,000 calories to make Mr. and Mrs. Eagle happy every day. How many zeros did I have to add there? 3. How many zeros will I have to add here? So that means for every 2,000 eagles, assuming these things all weigh the same, for every 2,000 pounds of eagle, how many pounds of python do we need? 20,000. How many frogs do we need? How many pounds of frog? 200,000. How many pounds of grasshoppers does it make to make that work? 2 million. How many pounds of grass does that require? 20 million. That's how ecosystems work. You have to have a lot of producer to keep just a little bit of top producer. This is why, by the way, listen, if you have vegetarian friends, they are very efficient. They're eating plant material. They can satisfy, you know, if they have to have a 2,000 calories a day of plant material, it only takes 20,000 calories of plants in the wild to make that. And that's doable. Does that make sense? Basically, weird as this may be, if you weigh about 150 pounds, it takes about 1,500 pounds of vegetables a day existing somewhere in the world to sustain you. which isn't that much because the world's a very big place. But if you're constantly eating animals, it takes 10 times that. If you're like eating animals that eat other animals, it takes 100 times that. Does that make sense? So the further away you get from the source of energy, the less efficient it is. The more there has to be beneath you to sustain us. This is why you'll hear environmentalists talk about the fact that the whole world couldn't eat the way we eat. All right? Here we eat tons of meat, just about every meal, right? And we eat it pretty inefficiently. I don't know about you, but I know sometimes I buy meat and it sits in my fridge and I go in a few days later and go, oh, I should have cooked that chicken. I wonder what it's like. Garbage. Get rid of it, right? Does that ever happen in your house? Yeah. Maybe you're more efficient than I am, but I know it happens to ours sometimes. You forget about something, it sits there and you throw it out. The whole world can't eat that way. I know I've mentioned this a few times, but I spent the summer in Haiti where they eat very little meat. Maybe like if they have a meal with meat, say they made like a bean and rice dish with chicken, you know, every person would get like a couple little cubes of chicken and then lots of rice and beans, right? Just get a little bit of meat and lots of rice and beans because it's very efficient to eat rice and beans and corn and potatoes and vegetables because that's a very efficient energy transfer to us. Does that make sense? All right. So now, I want to talk about that reaction. That reaction over there, we said, where I burn the sugar, is the same reaction happening inside of all of us right now, right? Every time I move my arm, I go like this. How do muscles move? It's involved. Yeah, so my brain sends a little electrical signal, and a muscle is what? It's just a molecule that, you guys have talked about this before, it's really fascinating. It's just a muscle, it is a muscle, it's just a molecule, it's just a little thing put together by atoms that is designed that when it gets a little bit of electrical shock, it gets shorter. Just gets shorter. You can think of it as like a spring, where if we provide just a little bit of electrical energy, it shrinks in on itself. That's all a muscle is. And your muscles are just made of millions of these. In my case, probably billions. I mean, look at me, I'm huge. But I know, you're intimidated, it's okay. That's all your muscles are. They need a little bit of energy, and with a little bit of energy, they can get shorter. And I can use that. If I make my muscle shorter, what does my arm have to do? Has to get closer. And then if I want to move it back, I can stop giving energy to these and instead give the energy to the muscle on the other side. And when this muscle gets shorter, now what's going to happen to the arm? It's going to extend. That's all your muscles are. Every joint in your body has muscles that pull it one way when they get shorter, and these muscles relax. And then on the other side, a muscle that works against it. And if I make this muscle shorter and this muscle relaxes, it goes the other way. But what does it need to do that? It needs energy. Where does it get the energy? From your mitochondria doing exactly that reaction. They take sugar and they burn it. And they use the energy to do stuff. So, let's talk about that as a reaction. We call this process the process by which we take sugar and we take food and we get the energy out of it, cellular respiration. Now, that's the term for it. Cellular respiration. I don't like being plugged in here. I find this unpleasant, but at least I can stand. I'm way too hyperactive to be in one place for like 5 minutes. So cellular respiration is this process. Now, what did I actually burn over there? What did I start off with? Yeah, I start off with sugar. And let's remember, sugar is basically a lot of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen just stuck together. Now again, where do I get my sugar? Either from plants directly or by eating animals that ate the plants. And for cellular respiration to happen, what do I need? What does your body constantly have to take in? Food to get the sugar. What else, though? I can't use the sugar if I don't have... Well, the energy's in the sugar. We're going to try and get it out. But what do I need to do that? What did I need over there? What did I need to have in that chamber to make that fire happen? Potassium, the potassium iodide, but only because it provided it with lots of... What? Heat. I put the heat in. Put the heat in, but so that it would have lots of oxygen. Good, but you're right. It was the right compound. The potassium is just a leftover. What I really wanted from that potassium nitrate was the oxygen, right? We need oxygen to burn sugar. That's why you need to breathe in oxygen. That's why when you are running, you need to breathe in a lot more oxygen. That's why when you're sleeping, you need to breathe in a lot less oxygen. But you still need some oxygen? Sure, why? Why? I'm sleeping. I'm not doing anything. Why can't I just go on? Like when my car is in the parking lot, it doesn't have to run the motor. Why? Yeah, I'm still pumping blood because what's still working? My heart is still working, and my heart's a muscle, so it needs to burn sugar, and to burn sugar, it needs oxygen. What else? I'm sleeping, but like my brain still works. My brain probably works better when I'm asleep. Couldn't be worse. Do any of you work? Does anyone have a job? Do you have nightmares about your job? Do you ever have work nightmares? Do you have work nightmares? I was, for years and years, I was a cook at a restaurant for about 6 years. All through high school and through my first year of university, I cooked at a restaurant. And it was the hardest job I've ever done. I really liked it. It was a fun job, but it was so stressful. Because you'd sit back there and the stupid printer would just print a shit and it would say like, cook 3 steaks and 2 pastas. And you'd go, okay. I'd start, and then it prints again and says you need 3 steaks, 1 medium, 1 well done, 1 rare, and 1 with baked potatoes, 1 with mashed potatoes, 1 with no garlic. And you put up, and then as you're doing that, someone goes, I need 2 salmon fillets, 1 with no garlic, 1 with extra garlic. And so you just put them down and then you go, oh gosh, I put garlic on both of them. You have to, and it's a nightmare. So I still to this day have this nightmare that I'm behind the line, it's just me and the printer's just printing and printing and everyone's shouting for food and I'm burning everything and I panic and I wake up and go. So anyway, yeah, so for my brain to do that, it's got to be working. And for it to be working, it needs oxygen. So at all times, we need oxygen. Now over there, we took sugar and we took oxygen. And you're right, by the way, we needed a little heat to make it start. And your body has to do that too. We always have to have some energy reserved to make the reaction happen. And when we do, what did we get when we burned that sugar? Okay, we got heat. Very good. So we get energy. We definitely get energy. When I burned that, we saw 3 kinds of energy when I burned that sugar. There was heat, for sure. What else did we get that was energy? Oh yeah, so actually I didn't think that, but there's some movement too, like kinetic energy, because the actual like stuff moved, right? Sure. Yeah, produce gas, but that's not an energy per se. It's something that was produced, and we're going to talk about that, but it's not the energy. So some movement, some heat, what else? Surely you noticed something else. Let's make our qualitative observations. What did we see when we burned that sugar? Yeah, and how did you know that? What did you see that told you that? Very good. And a flame is just when it produces light. Very good. Yeah, so the flame told us. So that energy comes in different forms. We saw light. Now, light doesn't really apply inside our bodies. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, I don't know, but we don't see it. But it definitely produced heat. It produced motion. It also produced, anyone else notice, if I had been blind, would I have known when the reaction happened? Yeah, what else did? Oh, so I could have felt it, totally. That's totally true. What else? Yeah, it also made a sound. And we use energy to make sound sometimes, right? I'm using energy to make sound right now. And I bet you're all appreciative of it. So we get energy that we can use to make heat or motion or sound. What else did we get from that? It produced energy. It also produced carbon dioxide. Yeah, it produced carbon dioxide. And in fact, because it's not even a great perfect reaction, it didn't have a perfect amount of oxygen, it also made some just carbon, right? That was that thick black soot you saw. That's why it couldn't get enough oxygen. Instead of making CO2, it just made carbon. But our bodies are very efficient. You don't get gunked up with thick black carbon. Our bodies are very good at making sure you have enough oxygen, and it always makes CO2. And then there's something else it made that you couldn't have seen. But I bet if you go back and look at the first page of this note, you can figure out the other thing that must have been made. You wouldn't have been able to see it. It's invisible in this reaction, but it was there. What do you think it was? Who's a detective in here? What do you think? What? Yeah, it made that, definitely. Totally true. One more thing you couldn't see that it made. That's a good one. But one more product. What do we think? Yeah, it did make a smell. That's probably not the sugar. That's probably other things in there. Especially we got some of that phosphorescent. The potassium itself gives a smell, even though that's just something we added there. But just this, what else did it make, do you think? Yeah, nice and people, nice and loud. Yeah, water. Believe it or not, it makes water. This is true of everything we burn, by the way, that has carbon. When you burn gasoline in your car, what comes out of the tailpipe? Carbon dioxide and water. You're driving around and carbon dioxide gets pumped out of your car and water gets pumped out of your car. Just like this. Now, I want you to look at this, and then I want you to look at photosynthesis. What do you notice? Look at this and go back and look at the first page. What do you notice? I want you to use those powers of observation. I want you to compare photosynthesis and cellular respiration. What do you notice? We'll give them a minute to see if they can spot it. Something should jump out at you. Yeah, good. Something should jump right out at you. What's this thing? Okay. So, yeah, what do you got? Shh, guys. Quiet doing. Thank you. I'll eat. I had, when I was in grade 11, you guys are in grade 9. When I was in grade 10, I had an English teacher named Miss Gillespie. She was Scottish and terrifying. And I remember her for 3 things. The first is that in a very thick Scottish accent, she once told me, after I had asked her what our homework was that day, she said, "Joseph Orlando, have I ever mentioned to you that I have a picture of the dark prince of power, Satan himself, at home that looks just like you?" To which I responded, "No, you never told me that." And then I thought, why do you have a picture of Satan at home? So that stuck in my memory. My other memory of Miss Gillespie is that I once got my last report card before exam from her. And I shouldn't tell you this, but I wasn't always the best student, and I hadn't yet handed in my final essay. So we got a report card the day after she took them, and I hadn't finished it yet. I'd been at home, I stayed up all night, and it was crap, and I knew it was crap. And I thought I need one more day to get this thing to be better so I can hand it in. And I got my report card from her, and she'd given me a 95 on this paper I hadn't handed in yet. And I thought, first I thought, excellent. Then I thought, this isn't right. So I went up to her and I said, Miss Gillespie, I can't believe I'm telling you this, but you gave me a mark on this thing that I didn't even hand in. And she went, yeah, well, it's probably what you would have gotten. I don't want to read it, so you just keep it. And I said, okay. And then my third memory of Mrs. Gillespie is that when we were reading the book Lord of the Flies, which, do you read that in grade 9? You might. Have you read it yet? Anyway, it's a good book. I won't spoil it for you, so I'm just going to make up names. But she said, like, so we're going to be reading Lord of the Flies, and I've made for you a character sheet. So it's going to tell you each character's name, and you're going to fill in like their traits and things like that. So if you look here, you'll see, and again, I'm going to make names up so I don't spoil the book for you, but it'll say like, you can see Jonathan, and I suggest you not get too attached, because on page 33, you'll see he dies by having his head smashed on the rocks. And she proceeded to go through and tell us how every character died before we ever read the book, which is weird. So Gillespie was a character. Anyway, her famous line was she would look at you and go, sit down. And often she would say it if you were already sitting, but it was her version of be quiet, and you knew she meant business. So if you were talking in class, Gillespie would look and go, Joseph Orlando, sit down. And you would find a way to sit lower. And so anyway, sometimes when I'm not thinking, it comes out. So there you go. Anyway, what we notice is that these are just actions. This and cellular respiration are just opposite reactions. Yeah. Yep. So here's the idea. A plant sits out in the sun, and as the sun beats down on it, it's able to take that energy and using atmospheric oxygen and water it gets from the soil, it turns it into sugar. And it releases some oxygen. Does that make sense? So it takes the sun's energy and it makes sugar. And to do that, it has to use carbon dioxide and water, and it releases waste oxygen. When we get our hands on the sugar, we take the sugar, we react it with the same oxygen that the plant just gets rid of as waste, and we make carbon dioxide and water, and we get back that energy. Does that make sense? These reactions work hand in hand. It's the same reaction backwards and forwards. The sun takes energy and makes sugar. We take sugar and make energy. Does that make sense? Everything else is just recycling. When we make the energy, we release carbon dioxide. We're breathing it out all the time. The plants take that carbon dioxide, they use the sun's energy, and they make it back into sugar. We kill the plant, we eat the sugar, we take the sugar, we turn it into energy. We breathe out the carbon dioxide. And it just cycles and cycles. But all the energy comes from the sun. Does that make sense? And that's the big takeaway here. These are opposite reactions. And to keep in mind, plants have it both ways. Plants are constantly using the sun's energy to make sugar. And they are also using those sugars to do stuff. So plants are undergoing photosynthesis and cellular respiration at the same time. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay. We're close to done here. I'm going to give these back to you tomorrow, and I apologize for not doing so today, though if you're really keen to see what you got, you can come ask me. But I want to take them up tomorrow, the labs you've given me. Tomorrow we will have another little lab activity. It's not a big one, but we'll be working in the back of the lab, looking at carbon dioxide and looking at some exercise-based stuff. But today, if you haven't already, first and foremost, if you did not give me your candle lab or your surveying lab, make sure you get that done and into me, all right? You're collecting late marks at this point. We're adding up. So make sure you get them to me. Secondly, on Monday, I am going to mark the 2 online modules, all right? Ecosystem bit that I had you do, I call it 2.2 ecosystems, I think, on Google Docs. And then the gizmo where you, and the sheet that goes with that, I'm going to be marking both of those on Monday, which means that you have on your own time, or again, during less important classes that we care less about, to get those things done, which of course is all the classes, but not this class, because this is the important class. So, let's make sure we are all on the same page here. That is the worst eraser I've ever seen. But that's okay. That is grade 12 advanced functions. Somebody came for some help. So the candle and survey lab, this is overdue. So if you don't have this to me yet, please get in. I have just about everyone. There's a couple people I don't. So talk to me. 2.2 ecosystems. This was on Google Classroom. This is what we did on Tuesday when I was away. That's going to be due Monday. All right, Monday is when I mark it. So you have until then to get online and finish it. Okay? Make sure that was the one where it asked you to give me some pictures from your ecosystem. It asked you to look up primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary things. It asked you to make a food web related to your ecosystem. Does that ring a bell for everyone? Yes. Everyone's seen that? Good. I'm going to be marking that on Monday. And likewise, and the simulation one. The simulation one should not take too long. I hope people who did that yesterday should have found that it does not take long to get through that. I actually found that to be kind of fun. But anyway, the food web simulator, I will also be checking those on Monday. All right, and that is also on Google Classroom. And that is also going to be marked on Monday. Okay? So make sure you're keeping track of this stuff. We don't want you falling far behind. I've done pretty well so far. I've got just about everything from everyone. Let's make sure we keep that up as a trend because it's good. We got a couple minutes. Stay in your seats until the bell rings. I don't have some sort of fun ending activity for you. I'm sorry.
I'll tell us another story about your teacher.
Okay, I'll tell you one more story about Gillespie because this one didn't happen to me, so I don't think of it as a story. But I had a friend named John Park, and he was a great guy. He's an amazing guitar player, a great musician. I still see him once in a while. He plays out and I play out, so sometimes we'll be playing at the same place, which is a lot of fun. But he was a real hothead. He had a big temper on him, and so he was often in class. We'd see him kind of getting frustrated. And most teachers, being nice, well-adjusted people, would kind of see when he was starting to get frustrated, and they'd try to cool him down. But Miss Gillespie did not do that. She instead would go, "Jonathan Park, it looks to me like you're getting a little upset there. Am I going to have to give you a parking ticket?" And he'd go, "It's not funny, Miss Gillespie." She'd say, "Oh, are you talking back, Johnny? That's another parking ticket." He'd go, "It's not even a good pun." And she'd say, "Oh, now you're questioning my puns. That is yet another parking ticket for Jonathan Park." And then he'd like freak out. She'd say, "Johnny, to the office then. Have a great day." So, anyway, was it you?
Yeah.
How do you know that?
That was like
I understood it pretty well. I used to book her all the time to play. I managed the restaurant in Niagara Falls. And I really booked out and all the time to come play for us.
Yeah.
And then she and my cousin Mike are really, really good friends.
Yeah, I go to her conference like all the time.
So good.
Right now here.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Do you have a record like Windows and Stones? I like this. Anyway, very cool.
Yeah.
Yes. No problem. Okay, I think I'm okay with that. This time, no, because we didn't have computers for you. If you've done it already, I'm okay with that. With whom were you working? You're with Frank. Does it on that? Okay. Okay, I'm okay with that. That's fine. Yes. Oh, look at you. Hold on. How's that? Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, feel free to. And it's simple. You just missed the page of questions. Yes, yeah. If I'm not mistaken. Oh, no, that's not you. I'm sorry. Okay, so this is a hot mess. You know that, right? But that's not the big deal. It's okay. It's okay. Just get some paper. Just rewrite the questions. Give me full sentences. And then the other thing. You got, that is right. And then this, I'm not going to lie to you, didn't know what you were doing. But that's okay. Can I tell you what I was looking for? What I wanted you to do was focusing on the breath. So once you got these, you've gone and line of that fit, and you do great line of that fit. Now, put your unknown on the line of that fit. So what did you know about unknown one? You knew unknown one took 8.4 seconds to burn, right? So I want you to go to 8.4 seconds. Go across 2 lines, and you put a point there. And then follow that down. And tell me how big a container that is.
I just estimated.
Yeah, no, I don't want you to estimate. I want you, yeah. So you did way more work, and your work is good, but I want you to use the graph.
Yeah, so I thought you like had to use the other.
I know, and like the work that really is very good.
I thought I'd do the rest.
Yeah, you got it. Also, that's false.
I thought you wanted me to use all this information to use it through, so this is what this is all.
Yeah, and it is about that, but I want to get in the habit of using the graph, because graph is a really powerful tool. See how much easier this is? And believe it or not, in theory, you should get the exact same answer, but we want to work on extrapolating from our graph. Does that make sense? And then the second one, make the graph again so that it is big enough to fit. So that makes sense. You can't put the unknowns here. You have to keep going up by, you did what? That means 2 is 100? Yeah. You have to keep going up by 100, and you have to put the unknown on and follow it down. And that'll tell you how big it is.
So
Do you want me to show you an example, or do you get it? So I'm happy to show you an example. Great.
So do I do this in last time?
No, do that another time. I mean, if we have some free time in class, you're welcome to spend it doing that.
Okay.
But here's what you do. Now you're going to do it by hand, but so we're not here all day, I'm going to do it on the computer, but it's the same idea, okay?